returned to the present, and Kang Min asked Kang Ji-hoon what he meant. The teenager started screaming, asking after Lee Hong-mi if it was really true. Park Choa intervened in the conversation, saying that in the end, the bastard was infected. And then she added that Lee Hong-mi was also infected. Sung-yeon interjected her opinion, saying that she hadn't liked it from the beginning and didn't understand why the situation had to be made worse. And then she was outraged that she had suffered so much with these classmates that her nerves could no longer stand it. Suddenly, Isuri interrupted Seon-young, asking what was going on. They all turned to the girl and she said that everything seemed very strange to them and called them here. And then she asked if they weren't all friends with Lee Yeon-woo and Han-mi, but the teenagers denied it. And then Isuri asked if they were also infected. Seong-young interrupted, saying that was enough, and then asked if Isuri knew what they were doing with the infected. And then she screamed that she didn't see Lee Yeon-woo turn into a monster. Then she added that Isuri talked to Yeon-woo the most. She spent most of her time with him, so she could have been infected. Isuri asked with a calm face what Sung-yeon was getting at. She replied that Isuri pretended not to understand, but she was defending the bastard so much that she could be up to something. And then, Sung-yeon said that Isuri and Yeon-woo were dating. The girl still held her face, even though the others were shocked. Kang Min quickly intervened, telling them to all stop, because it was not a good idea to fight with each other. Sung-yeon kept yelling that Isuri was to blame for protecting Yeon-woo. Kang Min calmed her down. Then Isuri furrowed her eyebrows and looked toward her classmates. Meanwhile, the events moved to another room in the subway, somewhere near the bus stop, where there used to be a lot of people and it was impossible to get through. It was completely empty. There was a food and drink vending machine nearby. Kang Ji-hoon was sitting next to him. It was as if he wanted to get away from the noise. The teenager was thinking about choosing something for himself, but suddenly froze and just looked at one point motionlessly. He thought about his Lee Hong-mi. Seeing her slowly die and turn into a monster was impossible. She told her friend how much she wanted to go home to her parents, but Kang Ji-hoon lost her again. The teenager was shaking from the memories, and there was such pain inside that would not go away even with time. At that moment, Park Choa approached him, and Kang Ji-hoon immediately came to his senses. She asked why the boy was here alone if there could be cells everywhere. Kang Ji-hoon wiped his face and eyes with his sleeve and said it was not important. Park Choa understood everything herself. She was very observant of Kang Ji-hoon and understood his feelings. And then she pretended that nothing had happened and took off her briefcase, offering to share it. Kang Ji-hoon was very cold and ran away from talking, so he just stood up, turned around, and told her to do what she wanted. Park Choa swallowed her insult and asked if the teenager wanted to stay in Seoul. Kang Ji-hoon stopped. The girl added that he was going home, but now he seems to have changed his mind. And then, as if nothing had happened, Park Choa took the food bag and asked if it was enough for her and if she could carry it herself. Then she returned to the topic and asked Kang Ji-hoon if it was because of Lee Hong-mi. The teenager could not ignore this question and asked what business Park Choa had with his relationship. The girl agreed, saying that it did not concern her in any way. And then she asked if Kang Ji-hoon was interested, and he looked at the girl. Then he turned around and swore. Park Choa stared at his back, sending him off with a look. Meanwhile, the others were in some room arguing. Kang Min asked everyone if they had taken the most necessary things and ordered them to check everything. Isuri stood aside as if she were not with them, thinking about something of her own. The girl could not get Yeon-woo out of her mind and the information that he had become a monster. Inside her was a maelstrom of emotions of misunderstanding and worry and sadness, but she didn't show it. But most of all, she wondered why it happened, because Yeon-woo wanted to survive. Meanwhile, Kang Min was asking Seon-young about So-yeon, since she and the others were not with them. The girl tried to contact her, and then looked at Kang Min and seemed to be considering something. And then she asked if he liked So-yeon. He asked if she really wanted to talk about it now. Then Seong-young began to tell us about Park Seo-young. It turned out that the girl had been running after her at first, like everyone else, but then its speed slowed down, and So-yeon was always looking back. After that, the girl stopped completely, and Seong-yeon asked her what she was doing and ordered her to leave quickly. Kang Min asked if Park Seo-young had really just decided to stop. It wasn't like her. Isuri exhaled tiredly and then continued her story. It turned out that Seo-young stayed with Park Min. The teenager sat twisted on the road, whimpering and screaming in pain. So-yeon noticed that he was infected and told him about it. But she did not move away from the teenager, even though she was not wearing a protective suit. Park Min shouted that there was a way out and a way to survive, So-yeon did not understand what he was talking about and just stood there in a shocked stupor. Park Min ordered his pocket to be checked, and very quickly. Meanwhile, the events moved to a completely different location, where military helicopters were flying. It was visible from the window of the room. So-yeon was sitting in it, leaning against the table as if asleep. She woke up to someone coughing. It turned out to be Park Min, who was lying on the ground. He looked pretty bad. The teenager stood up and looked away, but Park Min did not recognize the area. It was something new for him, so he asked So-yeon where they were. The girl replied that it was the bank of the Khan River, and added that luckily there was a place where they could hide. And then So-yeon told me that now there were many soldiers there and they were probably looking for a big monster. Suddenly Park Min laughed out loud and said that he had survived again. So-yeon did not look in his direction, and the teenager thanked her for saving him twice already. And then the girl handed him a package of pills and asked what they were. I asked him since when he had been taking them. Seo-young was outraged that Park Min hadn't told her this earlier because there was a way to prevent the infection. She yelled at him to help everyone, and Hanmi could have been saved then too. So-yeon also added to the effort for Yeonhwa. He needed help the most. The girl was screaming and angry, demanding to know the answer to her question. Park Min said that it was So-young who gave him the medicine and that he did not ask for help at all. And then he asked if the girl had decided to come and help him. Park Min leaned in very close to Seo-young, his eyes and gaze looking crazed. And then he said with a smile that he had received the medicine thanks to that red-headed man. After that, he simply grabbed the medicine from So-yeon's hands by force, and she didn't even have time to react. She just rubbed her arm, which was hurting because Park Min had hit the girl who had saved his life twice. The teenager laughed again, saying that in any case, he was alive again. Suddenly, he wasn't having so much fun anymore when he noticed something. It turned out that the package of pills was empty, and he did not feel it right away. So-yeon realized what had happened when Park Min looked at her with a surprised look and asked if the medicine was taken because of her help. And then So-yeon added that she had the medicine. Park Min attacked her to give them to him. Luckily, a homeless man, Choi, walked into the room. He caught them insulting Park Min and twisting Seo-young. At first, Choi was happy that the teenager had woken up, but then he changed his tone and ordered him to take his hands off Seo-young. Yeon-woo's father came inside and suggested that Park Min tone it down a bit. He added that there were too many soldiers so they could be heard. Park Min looked at the man silently but obeyed. They were holding guns, so the teenager was at a complete disadvantage. Then the teen whispered to So-yeon that she should have realized she was playing with fire, but the girl held her ground and asked if she should have asked him directly. Park Min said that she was annoying him. Choi interrupted the conversation and asked what the two were whispering about. And then he said that they checked the area around and looked away. Choi continued that they did not find their friends, only their cap, which was held by Yeon-woo's father. This is the only thing left of his son. The man said he knew for sure that they were not here now. So-yeon addressed her father Jeon-woo as Mr., but was interrupted. The man asked to be called Mr. and added that he wanted to find their friends. But the teenagers were outraged because they would have been better off finding a way out of Seoul. Yeon-woo's father objected, saying that they had to find all the teenagers and added that they were in big trouble because of his son. Park said something sarcastic that screamed indignation. Yeon-woo's father told them to try to survive until they came. Then the man left the room, but Choi stopped him and asked him to wait. Park Min thought about everything that had happened and everything that had been said. The thought that Yeon-woo could still be alive kept running through his mind, and it could be used in this case. The man hadn't left yet and stopped at the exit. Suddenly, Park Min called out to them and said he wanted to go with them. The man stopped and looked at the teenager, and he said again that he also wanted to find Yeonhwa. He justified this by saying that Jeon-woo was his friend. Park Min added that he couldn't just lose him like that. It might have worked for Yeon-woo's father, but the others knew the truth. The events moved to one of the narrow alleys between the houses. There was someone in one of them. There were no cells or monsters. Everything looked quite clean, but very deserted. Somewhere inside, down the stairs, there were dripping sounds. The cells would drain to the ground and make the sound of water dripping. It turned out that Lee Yeon-woo was inside. The teenager sat in complete silence and looked down with his head down. Jeon-woo looked at his hands. They were absolutely clean. All the cells had disappeared from his body. Only scars remained. The teenager was surprised that he had survived and not died. Jeon-woo wanted his mother to be like him. Suddenly, someone shone a flashlight at Jeon-woo's back and shouted. It was a male guard who yelled at the teenager, asking what he was doing there alone. But Yeon-woo was silent, and this scared the guard, so he asked if the teenager was human. Yeon-woo remained silent. Then the man shouted even harder and louder, ordering him to answer him. Then the teenager decided to get up from his seat. He straightened up and turned to the guard, but then the man began to panic, ordering Yeon-woo not to return if he was infected. The guard began to bombard him with questions about where he was from and who he was with. Then he shone a light on Janhwa's neck, which was covered with scars. He screamed in fear and squirmed. After that, he tried to calm down and started digging in his pocket, commenting that he had left the door open. And then the guard called out to Yeonwoo again, and this time the teenager responded. The man handed Yeonwoo some medicine. The teenager took them, and the guard commented that he saw how injured Yeon-woo was. After that, the man simply turned around and left, advising Yeon-woo to go to the nearest shelter if he had nowhere else to go. The guard turned from the corner of his eye, adding that wherever he went it was dangerous, so he advised him to be on the lookout. Yeon-woo looked at the man, who was very kind to him. The guard added that there was a lot of stuff here, and then he said that he was leaving and wished him good luck, without waiting for a word from the teenager. Yeon-woo was holding the medicine that this kind man had given him. He stood there silently and just looked at the medicine. There were many thoughts in his head, but he did not know how to act around people now. Meanwhile, the guard went into the room where the teenagers were making noise and thus attracted the man's attention. He saw that they were doing something strange, so he came in and asked them in a stern voice what was going on. A guy in a gas mask and duct tape in his hands looked at the man with incomprehension. The guard said how good it was that he found people here and said they would be allies now. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo decided to come out of his hiding place. Suddenly, he heard some sounds and looked to the side. There was a room with a transparent door, and it caught Yeon-woo's attention. Through the glass, the teenager saw a horrifying picture of a man tied to a chair, his body turning into a monster. Yeon-woo walked through the door and carefully examined what was happening inside as he got closer. The man seemed quite familiar to him, but Yeon-woo did not pay much attention to it, so he kept walking until he heard a voice. He heard the voices of teenagers laughing at the monster and calling him Grandpa. Then, Yeon-woo realized what was happening and immediately recognized the guard. The hooligans filmed the man and laughed at him. He begged them to stop and asked why they were doing it at all. One of them ridiculed the guard for simply crying while he was being tied up with electrical tape. Another guy said that their guard was doing hard work and held out a bottle of cells, offering him a drink. But he had his mouth taped shut, so the guy just poured the contents onto the man's face. The cells were dragged out like saliva, which was pretty disgusting. One of the company members asked if the guy had infected the man, and then called him crazy. Just at that moment, the doors of the Yeon-woo were open. The company discussed that everything happened very quickly, and they wanted to put the camera in the man's mouth. Yeon-woo walked slowly, listening to what these bastards were talking about. They wanted to come up with something else they thought would be fun. The group was discussing something loudly among themselves, and didn't pay any attention to the fact that the door was open. Suddenly, one of the guys in the hood turned around because he saw something and swore loudly. Yeon-woo was standing in the doorway, and the guy asked who he was. And then he shouted at the teenager why he had to be so scared. Then they asked what Yeon-woo was trying to do, but the teenager remained silent. The other members of the company also took notice of the teenager and looked hostile when their leader was angry that he was being ignored. But Yeon-woo just turned around and left. He was not interested in this company, let alone in quarreling with it. The leader was outraged that the teenager had just left. Then the guy in the gas mask asked if Yeon-woo was alone. And then he turned to the exit, smiled, and said that he had an idea, suggesting that we infect Yeonwoo as well. The company leader said that in this case, the teenager would get infected and run at them, hinting that it was a bad idea. But the guy in the gas mask stood his ground, saying that he wanted to film it and that it was great horror content. The group went outside after Yeon-woo, and the leader told the boy to do what he wanted. The teenager just kept walking, did not look back. The guy in the gas mask said that he would take off Yeonwoo himself. The leader said that the water bottle was in his bag, and the guy in the gas mask was looking for something. Then he took out another bottle, which was half full of cells. The leader said he had recently collected them. Then the boy said goodbye to everyone, smiled, and told them to wait for him while the teenager took a couple of cool pictures. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo simply walked where his eyes led him. A guy was sneaking behind him. He took out a bottle of cells, hiding behind a corner, and smilingly waited for the fun to begin. Suddenly, his expression changed dramatically and was no longer so cheerful, for Yeon-woo had answered him. Without turning around, the teenager said he could feel the cells approaching him. But the guy just laughed and called Yeon-woo a jerk and said he was so scared that he was speechless. He said that Yeon-woo did not even know who the guy was and asked why he was talking to him like that. Yeon-woo still hadn't returned and said he didn't want to do it. And then he thanked him for coming to him. Suddenly, the cells in his bottle began to crawl out and move. They went to the face of this scumbag. Yeon-woo said he had no right to play with people's lives. The boy begged Yeon-woo to stop, but the teenager did not feel any emotion, let alone pity. Meanwhile, other members of the company stood with their phones and did not understand why their leader had been gone so long and had not yet given a signal. The girl was looking at something on her phone. The other one was trying to contact Seb. At that moment, the guy in the gas mask noticed someone right in front of him. It was their leader, and the guy asked him what he was doing and why he was frozen in place. But Seb didn't answer and was acting strangely. After that, the guy growled like a monster, and his partner in the gas mask realized that something terrible had happened. Seb returned to him. Virus cells were hanging from his face, and it was clear that he was infected. The girls also noticed this and were scared. The guy turned even more, his mouth open as if he was going to attack them. The company started running away from the guy, screaming. Then Yeon-woo came out and walked by the monster without fear. The teenager did not even look up, just walked calmly. The girl noticed this and asked if Yeon-woo was also infected if he was acting so strangely. Suddenly, something happened. She was pushed and froze. After that, the girl just fell to the ground when everyone was running away as fast as they could. She raised her head and swallowed loudly. The monster's roar was getting closer. The infected boy ran toward the girl to attack her. She froze and only managed to cover her face with her hands and scream. But the monster did not have time to attack the girl, because its released cells seemed to be magnetized in a different direction. It turned out that it was Yeon-woo. For some reason, he decided to save this girl. The teenager told the monster to make him feel like a victim. Meanwhile, everyone else ran away as fast as they could and left their friend alone, just abandoned her. One of the guys said that the bastard was infected and asked what she should do now. Suddenly, the masked man stopped. Others noticed and asked what happened. Perhaps he was also infected. The guy said he remembered the bastard and came back. And then he added that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Others did not understand what was happening. The guy came back to the company and said that he had seen his brother on the air and added that Yeon-woo was immune. Meanwhile, others were not doing so well. A bottle of virus cells was lying on the floor. The girl looked at her and shook her head loudly. Cold sweat ran down her face. Then she looked at the leader lying on the ground. Then her eyes fell on the culprit of their situation. Lee Yeon-woo looked down on the girl but did not show his emotions. The girl started crawling away and screaming that he would kill her and threatened that he shouldn't touch her. But Yeon-woo did not listen to the girl. He acted as if she was not there. And then he came very close to her face. He silently looked into the girl's eyes as if he was examining and searching for something there. She asked what Yeon-woo was doing. Her face showed a lot of fear inside. So the girl started shouting and asking what the teenager was going to do to her and ordered her to answer. Yeon-woo remained silent and looked down. The girl continued to curse the teenager and threatened not to touch her friends. But Yeon-woo simply turned around and left without saying a word. After that, he just said a short phrase that there were no cells there, and then he advised her to be careful. The girl with her mouth open looked at Yeon-woo with her eyes. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was still walking past some buildings and gas stations. The teenager thought that he did not know where he was going to go now. All the way he had traveled made absolutely no sense. Yeon-woo realized that he had no reason to live on. He did not know what to do next. The teenager could think of nothing else but his mother. Her image was in his head. She was always so kind and sensitive to him. His mother gave him a gift to make him feel comfortable in Seoul. It was her initiative. She was even ready to deceive her husband to please her son Yeonwa. Even when he was rude to her, his mother still accepted him as he was. At that moment, a woman walked by the teenager, but being in his thoughts, he did not notice her. Then someone shouted the word, "Mom." It turned out that this woman was with her child. She told her that she was hungry and asked when their dad was coming. The woman hugged her child and reassured him that his father would be back soon. Yeon-woo followed them with his eyes. The girl was sincerely happy that her father would be with them soon. And Yeon-woo was trying to get enough of the sight. The mother suggested that she wait for her father in the shelter, and then the girl asked if there were any monsters there, to which the mother replied that the shelter was a safe place and there were no monsters there. Yeon-woo looked to the side and realized that he was indeed passing by a shelter, and there were many people and soldiers there. For a split second, he stared at the place as if looking for someone or something. The workers distributed protective suits to everyone, offering to help them choose a size. A soldier stood nearby and looked at the area. Then someone called out to him and the man came back. It turned out to be Lee Yeon-woo in a special white suit. The teenager began to say that it seemed to him that there was no quarantine here. He continued that there are sleeper cells, and it is hard to believe, but they had to evacuate. The soldier was outraged by the courage of an ordinary passerby. The man asked if Lee Yeon-woo was in his right mind, and said that it was inappropriate to joke at such a time. Another soldier intervened and asked what was going on, but his partner said that nothing had happened. They started discussing Yeonwha. The soldier asked if he was the guy from the live broadcast. Then the man turned to the teenager and asked if he was in line, and then ordered him to go get a waiting ticket. He asked if Yeon-woo wanted food and shelter, but Yeon-woo remained silent and just looked down. After that, the teenager simply turned around and left. The military were surprised by this act, but then decided to ignore it. Jonah thought that he could do nothing. He would have no way of knowing. Then, one of the men in a suit and glasses started shouting loudly. Others ran to him and asked if he was okay. The man looked up and said that suddenly his face went numb. In fact, it was covered with virus cells. When others noticed, they started running away and screaming. The shelter was in chaos, and next to him was Jeon-woo, who was holding his hand toward the shelter. He decided that in this case, he would solve the problem himself. The girl whom Jeon-woo had saved from the monster was watching. She could not understand who this guy was and why he had such opportunities. Meanwhile, other civilians were running away screaming and not paying attention to what others were doing. And the man who was turning into a monster was screaming and begging for help. But the military opened fire on this poor man. The soldier fell to the ground and started to cough loudly. Then someone told him that he had talked about it. It turned out that it was Jeon-woo. He approached the soldier and looked at the floor. The teenager added that the place was infected, and he said so. Lee Yeon-woo turned his hand to other civilians. Several civilians also suddenly turned into monsters and screamed in pain. Then Yeon-woo clenched his fist and some cells were drawn to him like magnets. Cells began to come out of people's faces and were magnetically attracted to Yeon-woo. The teenager thought about what if he had done it out of the blue. If only he could get rid of all these cells. Maybe then his mother would be safe. Yeon-woo turned around and left, but someone was shouting at his back and calling for his father, someone's childish voice. It was that girl with her mother, who looked at Yeonwha like a monster and asked her mother when her father would come. She cried when Jeon-woo looked at her and told her mom how scared she was. Jeon-woo turned around and just kept walking. He accepted the fact that he was the most horrible monster. Virus cells were dripping from his arm, dragging along the ground behind him like threads. He thought about his father. Would he forgive him, the murder of his mother? Meanwhile, Yeon-woo's father went in search of his son. The man forgave him. He never held a grudge against him because he was his family. The whole company went in search of Yeon-woo. They got to the shelter and there were soldiers who blocked their way. Choi asked the teens if they had tried to contact Yeon-woo. Seo-young replied that she had, but he hadn't answered. The man continued to ask how they kept in touch without a phone, and then suggested that Jeon-woo might have gone back into hiding. He was suddenly overwhelmed by memories of his wife. Was she sleeping peacefully now? When he was lying on the bed in the shelter, and his thoughts were disturbed. He turned to his wife and asked if she was asleep. She talked about their son, Yeonwha, how he was feeling now. The father tried to reassure his wife and said that Jeon-woo was fine and he was waiting for them. The mother was silent for a while and just lay with her back to her husband. Then my father suggested that we go to bed and go looking for him again in the morning. But then my mother started talking and her tone screamed desperation. She said that if she was wrong and it was not like that, the woman would be very upset. Jeon-woo's mother was tired of the search and the silence from Jeon-woo. Her heart seemed to be unable to bear the experience any longer. She added that she didn't care if it was all a mistake. She would definitely protect Yeonwha. She will not betray him even at the cost of her life and for no money. He is her son. The woman added that Jeon-woo was the most precious thing she had. She then asked her father to promise that even if one of us made a mistake, they had to protect Jeon-woo. Meanwhile, the company had already reached the shelter and was actively asking passers-by about Yeonwha. The father described his son's features and appearance. In his mind, he promised his wife to do everything to the best of his ability. The soldier asked his partner if he had seen one, but the answer was unsatisfactory. The man thought that he had no right to leave his son in such a hell, no matter who he was. Then the military began to ask for more information about Lee Yeon-woo and his last whereabouts. The rest of the company was hiding around the corner, and Choi suggested that they all wait in place. Park Min was the last to stand. He didn't show much initiative and looked like a parasite. Suddenly, the guy turned to Park Seo-young and asked her to wait a bit. The girl turned around, and at that moment the teenager just threw her against the wall like some kind of animal, and So-yeon hit her head. He grabbed her by the collar, and looking around demanded to find a cure for him. But Park Seo-young held her own and asked with a stony face what Park Min meant. The guy was confused because he expected the girl to be afraid of him and give him everything quickly. So-yeon bombarded him with questions about why he was looking for Yeonwha and why he suddenly wanted to help him. But Park Min just laughed when she called him shameless. And then he looked up and asked with a serious face if So-young thought she could make a difference by helping others, and reminded her that she had also left Yeonwha at that time. Park Min added that Seo-young was the one who dumped this guy, just betrayed along with them. Then Choi came to them and shouted for them to keep up and follow him. They had to end the conversation, there was no other choice. As Park Min was leaving, he told Seo-young to stop pretending that she was good and innocent. And then he ordered me to give him the medicine while he was being nice, and emphasized that this was the last warning. Park Min approached Choi and asked the homeless man if they had been fighting again, but the teenager denied it. So-yeon stood in a stupor from all these words that were said to her. She didn't agree with everything she was told, but she knew in her heart that she couldn't escape the truth. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo's father's circumstances were no better. Choi came up to him and told him to go to the shelter because the teenager was not far away. The homeless man agreed to go and added that they had to find his son. He also recommended hiding the weapons. The man asked Choi if he was sure he was okay, but the homeless man replied aggressively that his father was up to no good again and added that they had to find Yeon-woo now. The teenager's father froze for a second and seemed to be thinking about something. Then he suddenly asked Choi if he missed his family, but the homeless man remained silent. And then the man apologized if it was off topic, but added that they could find his family if they had one. But Choi again responded aggressively and ordered him to stop talking nonsense. The homeless man did not even turn to the man, he just kept walking. After a short pause, Choi said that it was not the right time and they had other things to think about. They approached the shelter further and there was complete chaos. Everyone was screaming and rushing around. One of the military said that a new outbreak of infection had begun. A lot of special vehicles actually arrived at the shelter and took people out. And there were a lot of bodies on the floor. Their special difference was that they were infected but already dead. The military and rescuers were also standing nearby, and they were all talking on the radio in one voice about people suddenly becoming infected. There were also a lot of people standing there. One of the soldiers told me not to be so afraid because the results will be after the investigation. Then Yeon-woo's out-of-breath father ran toward them. He was screaming loudly and hurrying, trying to describe his son. For some reason, he thought they had definitely seen him. So-yeon stood behind and looked off to the side, listening intently to what people were saying. Civilians were huddled together, and a medic approached them and offered his help. Behind Park So-young, people were talking about the military having already gathered and why they hadn't stopped him. At these words, the girl turned and listened carefully. The little girl was talking about her brother, who had stretched out his hand and started screaming. The mother told her daughter to stop talking nonsense and not to complicate the situation. The girl showed how her hand was raised. Suddenly, Park Seo-young turned to the little child. She asked me in a sweet voice to tell her about that brother, and which way he went. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo got into some trouble again. A group of teenagers stood next to him, laughing and seemingly aggressive toward Yeonwha. One of the gang leaders in a pink jacket asked the others if they thought the teenager was joking with them. Another member of the gang said that the bastard Jeon-woo just decided to infect them himself, and that was it. Then a guy wearing a gas mask interrupted the conversation and shouted that it was the same immune scumbag on the air and ordered them to be careful. But others just laughed, saying that this could not be possible. Suddenly, Yeon-woo spoke after a long silence. He said that the gang was so pathetic it was funny. He went on to say that if the gang was not infected, he would not touch them and ordered them to leave. Jeon-woo said he was giving them a chance to leave. The company looked at him in silence and listened. Then one of them just laughed. After that, the gang leader simply kicked Yeonwha and threw him back. Jeon-woo fell to the floor and hit the wall. The leader told him that he had attacked the wrong people. The teenager started to get up. and the guy laughed and asked if he should hit him again. The gang leader sat down with Yeon-woo and laughed at the fact that he was immune, saying it was all a fairy tale. Then, the boy decided to hit the teenager again and asked if he was immune to punches, but the teenager grabbed him sharply by the arm. And then Yeon-woo looked up and said that he did not know about this immunity, and then apologized. The teenager continued that his body had many cells. The leader's eyes widened dramatically, and his self-confidence disappeared. At that moment, a lot of cells came out of Yeon-woo's hands and hit him in the face. The boy silently and emotionlessly watched the previously smug, arrogant guy screaming in fear. After that, Yeon-woo simply stood up and turned around to leave. The other gang members ran away and screamed. Their leader was screaming and looking at his infected hand, threatening to kill Jeonhwa. But he did not realize that he was already a corpse. The teenager stood still and remained silent, listening to the threats in his direction. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw this bastard fall to the ground and hold his infected hand, and the virus had already spread to the other one. Jeon-woo said without looking at the boy that he was now infected. Then he put his hand out to finish the job. Suddenly, someone shouted in his direction, and this familiar voice made Yeonhwa stop and fall into a stupor. He turned around and saw Park Seo-young approaching him. Yeon-woo did not know how to behave or react. He just stood silently and looked at the girl who was approaching him. Park Seo-young smiled because she was sincerely happy to see him. The girl came closer and closer to Yeon-woo and did not feel any trouble. She called out to the teenager. Her voice was so pleasant only she could speak like that. Park Seo-young attacked Yeon-woo with questions about where he was and that she had been looking for him for a long time. And so had his father. She said that everyone was looking for him. Suddenly, Park Seo-young's expression changed dramatically, and she opened her mouth wide. All because Jeon-woo just turned around and left. So-yeon tried to stop him and asked him to wait. Jeon-woo only asked why the girl was looking for him, and then he added that if they met again, would So-yeon really think that he would follow her again? After that, the teenager asked her to leave, saying that he could not go with them. Park Seo-young did not understand what was happening and asked for an explanation. Yeon-woo then asked if she wanted to save her friends. The teenager then said that they couldn't be together, it wouldn't work out, and he wasn't going to go home. Yeon-woo went on to say that he now knew for sure that he was no longer human, and he only wished Park Seo-young to take care of himself. And then he added that the two of them were just classmates, and they are not even close friends. After these words, So-yeon's face showed shock and disappointment. After that, she only asked if Yeon-woo really thought so. She turned away and put her head down. She was so offended. She felt betrayed. And then after a short silence, she began to say that she thought differently, pausing between words and choosing her words. In the end, Park Seo-young said she thought they were friends, and then she repeated it again, but more confidently and louder. Meanwhile, that bastard was lying on the floor, smug and screaming in pain of transformation. He lifted his face, which was covered in virus cells, and began to stand up. Park Seo-young saw this and was just shocked, stood in a stupor and did not know what to do. Yeon-woo noticed this, and he came back to find a terrible scene. This monster just jumped on So-yeon, and she didn't know what to do because it all happened so fast. Suddenly, the monster stopped and just froze in place. Its virus cells were magnetized back. Yeon-woo stood behind him and held the monster back with his hand, loudly swearing. So-yeon flew down to the ground, shocked by what had just happened. She watched as Jeon-woo held this monster of a guy, and he yelled at him and called him a bastard. The teenager looked at So-yeon, at the way she reacted. Tears were streaming down the monster's face. He was shaking and screaming. After that, he called Yeonhwa a monster. The teenager was furious at these words and clutched his hand. It meant only one thing. The monster screamed in pain, but managed to pretend that Jeon-woo had killed his friends. He repeated it again, and then simply fell to the floor towards the frightened So-yeon, who covered her mouth in fear. The boy's body was sprawled on the floor along with the cells of the dead virus. Now this monster was no longer a threat. Yeon-woo held his hand and laughed out loud as he looked at the monster. So-yeon was also breathing loudly and covering herself with her hands, showing that she was afraid. Then the teenager looked at her. They met each other's eyes, and while Yeon-woo was calm and focused, So-young's eyes were screaming with fear. Virus cells dripped from Yeon-woo's hand like water. The girl tried to tell him something. The teenager looked at his hand, which was covered with cells. At that moment, Park Min ran to them and shouted to the teenagers if they were okay. As he approached, his face gradually changed and became less cheerful. Yeon-woo told So-young that he now understood everything, but the girl did not understand anything, and just looked at her friend. He added that he understood why they could not leave together. Park Min ran to them and yelled at Yeon-woo, but when he saw what was lying on the ground, he abruptly stopped talking and stiffened. He saw the body of a monster of a boy lying without signs of life. Then, Lee Yeon-woo called out to Park Min, but his tone was not sweet or pleasant. He looked into the eyes of his enemy and said that if they met again, Yeon-woo would finish the bastard. After that, he just ran away, far away from them all. Park Min yelled after Yeon-woo to answer him properly and explain everything. And then he looked at Park So-yeon, who had her head down and was trembling. Park Min watched where Yeon-woo was going and gasped loudly, analyzing what had just happened. He thought about how he knew that this bastard Yeon-woo could also activate the cells. If there were dormant cells, he could finish off anyone he met, just like Lee Tian. Park Min didn't understand how Yeon-woo could have become like this, but he knew for sure that the teenager was getting stronger. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo ran wherever his eyes were. He didn't care where he went, just as long as he got away from everyone. Due to inattention, the teenager reached a dead end. He stopped and leaned against the wall, swallowing loudly and analyzing who he was trying to escape from. Yeon-woo remembered So-yeon, her frightened look and her question about whether the teenager was okay. He was angry at himself. He was angry at who he had become and the pain he was causing his loved ones. Yeon-woo did not want to live like this, but he could not do otherwise. The guy realized that he was a monster now, and it was easier to never contact anyone again. Otherwise, he will regret it later, and this feeling destroys him. At that moment, he heard some footsteps and then a whistle. After that, someone simply attacked Yeonwoo and hit him on the head, and then other hooligans joined in, and now the teenager had to fight them all off. Someone yelled at him and called him a scumbag for touching their brothers. He looked at these guys standing over his head and laughing. They wanted to hear something from Yeon-woo, but he could not speak. Suddenly, someone he knew called out to the teenager, saying that they had seen each other again. It was the girl that Yeon-woo had saved. She waved to him, saying that they were her friends, and they would punish him a little bit and then stop. Yeon-woo continued to be silent, only looking at the girl with a slanting gaze. Then she changed her expression and called him a bastard. Meanwhile, the events moved to an abandoned room where there was no one. Lee Yeon-woo was sitting on a chair, tied up and beaten. He was shaking from side to side. It looked like he had lost consciousness and was just coming to. He looked to the side to survey the area, as he did not understand how he had ended up here. Yeon-woo heard someone discussing what to do with him. He then looked at the group, which was fighting with each other and discussing something loudly. She felt Yeon-woo's gaze on her and looked back. The teenager was sitting on a chair and trying to get out, even though his hands were tied. Then a gang of hooligans called him out. They approached him, turned on their phones, and started filming. Someone suggested feeding Yeonwoo to the dogs. One of them took out Lee Yeon-woo's school ID and began to read information about him out loud. This guy scratched his ear and laughed that Yeon-woo was so young, telling him to call him bro because they were all brothers. Yeon-woo was silent and just looked at his offenders. The guy asked where he might have heard about it, but he couldn't remember and simply threw the teenager's document away. Then he put on a gas mask and asked his partners if they had heard anything about Yeonwoo. It seemed like he was acting out a skit. His partner asked him why he thought he knew Lee Yeon-woo and ordered him to stop with this clowning around. The guy in the gas mask was ordered to do what they planned, to fight Yeon-woo. He was afraid that the teenager could be contagious. Yeon-woo thanked him and said that he would not feel guilty if he infected them. The guy in the gas mask complained that Yeon-woo was at it again, and his partner was indignant, saying that he was very tired and wanted to sleep. After that, he just took a swing and kicked Yeonwoo in the face. It's easy to beat someone who is tied up and unable to move. The boy mocked Yeonwoo and felt cool for being able to overpower the bound teenager. But Yeonwoo didn't think about it. He decided that if he could bear it now, he wouldn't be to blame if he infected them all. Then a guy in a gas mask interrupted his thoughts and called out to Yeonwoo. He approached the teenager and told him that he understood what he was thinking and said that his brothers were not stupid. But if Yeonwoo did something, he would be dead. And then the guys standing by the fire tank asked if they had burned all the cells, hinting at Yeonwoo. The guy in the gas mask continued that everyone here wanted to survive, and the teenager understood this well. He added that his brothers were not idiots who could be intimidated by fairy tales. And then, this guy asked if Yeonwoo had ever heard of them, because they owned all the districts of Yonsan. After that, he took off his gas mask, saying that the teenager had fallen into the hands of the most notorious bandits. And then, He spoke for the girl Yeon-woo had talked to earlier and asked if she was his friend. The teenager's expression changed and the bandit noticed. A smile appeared on his ugly face. He asked again if it was his girlfriend, and then he smiled so nastily that I wanted to spit in his stupid face. The guy said that now Park Seo-young would suffer because of Yeon-woo. The girl was indeed surrounded by guys who were laughing and calling her cute. Park Min stood behind him, raised his hands and asked who they all were, adding that they were not enemies. A guy in a green sweatshirt appeared behind the teenager and asked why they were alone, and then he put his hand on his shoulder and offered to be friends. Park Min said that it was better not to, but they didn't listen. So-yeon was also approached from behind by boys, which scared the girl. She was grabbed by two guys, one of whom asked where such beauties came from, and his partner confirmed that So-yeon was very cute. The girl ordered them to stop, otherwise she would scream, but the guys just laughed at her. Then someone ordered them all to stop, otherwise they would be shot at. It turned out to be Choi. The attacker turned around and saw the man standing next to a bunch of his brothers, who were beaten and lying on the floor. The guys came back and stood in a stupor. Choi approached them and said that he had warned them that he would shoot. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo's face showed intense fear and hopelessness. His abuser made a nasty smile and said that it was all his fault. Behind him were other gang members. They were significantly outnumbered, but Yeon-woo's strength was winning. The teenager said that he would forgive them if they stopped behaving like that, because Yeon-woo was infected. Then the two gang members started arguing with each other about what the teenager had said to them. Then the girl who had started the whole mess intervened and stopped the argument with a shout. She ordered them to stop quarreling and deal with Yeon-woo in high-pitched tones. Otherwise, no one knew what could have happened. Then the guy who was making the fire took the initiative. He held a fire to Yeon-woo and asked if he wanted to play. But the teenager was silent and did not even look up. He realized that fire was really something that could kill him. After that, Yeon-woo tried to move his hands and feel the power in them and his actions. Then the teenager spoke. His voice was calm and confident, and because of this, the smug expression on the offender's face disappeared. Yeon-woo said that it was very uncomfortable with his hands tied, but this is the only way to kill an infected person. Then, virus cells appeared on the offender's face. After that, Yeon-woo finally looked up and suggested starting with this guy. Meanwhile, Choi and the teenagers were no better off. The gang mocked the homeless man because they did not see him as a real threat, because they were outnumbered. Choi held his ground and showed no signs of fear. Then a guy in a green suit holding Park Min asked if it was his father, because he looked like a homeless man. At that moment, someone called out to the smug, impudent man. It turned out that it was Choi, and he hit the guy so hard that he flew away. The offender was no longer so smug, and Choi asked if he wanted to take his hand away from Park Min. The guy in the green suit was approached by his other friends and asked if he was okay. One of them brought his partner up and asked Choi what he was doing. The homeless man got angry about this and said that they were getting what they deserved. Then, the gang prepared for a fight, and they took up combat positions. Choi noticed this and told the brave souls to approach only in a crowd. A fierce battle ensued. Everyone attacked the homeless man at once, but Choi was skillful and repelled their attacks. The guy who was supporting his partner in the green suit was very scared when he saw his gang being smashed like children. And then he yelled at Choi, saying that they could have fought back. When he was about to attack, someone called out to him. The offender's eyes became the size of a penny. It was Choi, and he told the brave man in a confident voice that he was giving him the last chance to escape. But the boy did not listen, and told the man not to force him to use force. But at that moment, Choi had already punched the bandit in the face with all his might. Behind him was a path of all the defeated brave men. At that moment, Choi heard a familiar voice shouting for help. It was Seo-young, and she was grabbed by the guy with the bottle. He told Choi that he had hurt the wrong person. The man panicked and ordered the offender to stop, offering to talk in exchange. But the guy kept a bottle of virus cells near Seo-young and threatened to infect the girl if Choi made a move. And then he asked if it would be cute if So-yeon became a monster and called the girl a woman of easy virtue. Then behind him, someone shouted that he had gone crazy. It was Yeon-woo's father. The man attacked the offender from behind, ordering him to stop immediately. He was very angry and just furious. He said that the offender had met a soldier on his way, so that was the end for him. The bandit was not expecting such an attack, and shouted at the man to let him go, threatening him with eggs. But Yeon-woo's father did not respond to his empty words, and simply threw the bottle of cells out of the bandit's hands. The open container fell to the ground, and the liquid inside spilled out. The bottle landed next to the boys who were lying on the ground. The bandit who was closest to these cells looked away at the bottle. Then he saw his hand covered with these eggs. The guy screamed, and the cells on his arm began to throw themselves at other gang members. So-yeon's offender saw this and started running away, apologizing to his partners for it. But he couldn't get far because a bat was waiting for him. It was Park Min, who hit the bastard so hard in the face that he flew away. Meanwhile, the company looked at the gang's photos on social media. They looked very cool there, but in real life it was exactly the opposite. So-yeon, the offender, was sitting unconscious behind him. Yeon-woo's father said he was disgusted to see it. Park Min assumed that the gang was local, and they were in the business of killing people and filming it, thinking it was funny. The teenager then said that they were crazy bastards, and asked how Lee Yeon-woo could have fallen for these assholes. The teenager's father was hurt by these words and was silent for a second. Then he looked at the offender So-yeon and scolded him. The man came closer to the milkman, grabbed him by the collar, and demanded to know what had happened to Yeon-woo. The father yelled at the boy, demanding to know whether they had touched his son. The offender began to come to a little bit of consciousness and slightly opened his eyes, but continued to be silent without saying a word. Choi approached the man and asked him to calm down and not go crazy. Meanwhile, So-yeon stood in the corner and looked at the washing machines. Park Min noticed this and looked at the girl carefully. So-yeon was completely absorbed in her thoughts and did not pay attention to what was happening around her. The girl looked at her reflection in the glass of the washing machine and memories came flooding back to her. At that time, Yeon-woo's hand was dripping with virus cells and he was saying terrible things, as horrible as his actions. So-yeon was in a stupor and did not know how to react to her friend. Yeon-woo said he now understood why they couldn't go together. Suddenly, So-yeon's memories were interrupted by Park Min, who asked the girl if she had calmed down, saying that everything would be fine. But the girl remained silent. So the guy asked her further why So-yeon was standing there alone, since she had just been rescued. So-yeon remained silent. Then Park Min asked what was really bothering him. When would he get his pills back because he needed them immediately? So-yeon did not even look in his direction, ignored him. Park Min continued to whine about how he couldn't wait any longer. Then she started rummaging through her bag. Then she just threw the pills at Park Min, not even listening to him. The guy's only response to this was how unexpectedly it all happened. So-yeon continued not to look at the teenager and only apologized. And then she added that Park Min could have taken them away. Seo-young's voice was completely indifferent. The teenager turned and looked at the girl. She had no face. So-young said she was always thinking about how to help Yeon-woo and even wanted to go with him. After that, So-yeon suddenly started crying when she remembered what happened to Yeon-woo's mom and said how sorry she was. Park Min turned to the girl and asked her what had happened, but she was already crying hard, covering her face with her hands. The teenager thought that he thought So-young was just pretending to be nice, but it seems that she was really close to that bastard Yeon-woo. Then Park Min went over to So-young, hugged her and calmed her down, asking if she really wanted to leave Yeon-woo like that. He said very nice things, saying that they were all here to help him. And even though they didn't get along very well, Yeon-woo's father decided to bring them together to help the teenager. Park Min looked into Park Seo-young's crying eyes and said that he would help them. Then he looked away as if he was remembering something, saying that he owed a lot to Yeon-woo. Meanwhile, the men were sorting things out in the other corner of the room. Choi suggested that So-young look at a place on the map. Meanwhile, Park Min was watching and analyzing everyone. He noticed that Yeon-woo's father and Choi were fighting well with their fists. Park Seo-young was also able to defend herself, and she was sincerely worried about the teenager. Suddenly, a smile appeared on Park Min's face, indicating that he had a plan. Meanwhile, screams were heard in the room where Yeon-woo and the gang were staying. The guy who had the virus and the cells started screaming, looking at his hands and dropped fire from them. The other two arrogant gang members looked on in horror. They decided that Yeon-woo had infected his partner. But the teenager just sat there doing nothing, not even raising his head much. The guy offered to set Yeonva on fire because he didn't know what to do and how to save himself. The teenager heard everything that was happening, but he was absorbed in his thoughts and concentrated on his strength. The offender was lying on the ground under his feet, screaming in pain. Yeon-woo was still trying to control him. The teenager could not use his hands, and the cells that were far away were poorly controlled by him. Yeon-woo realized that he had to get his hands on something, and decided to try one method. Suddenly, The teenager felt that when the abuser approached him, he was in control. So there was a difference of 2 meters. Then, if the cells connect with each other, what happened could happen. Meanwhile, 2 gang members with torches attacked Yeon-woo with shouts and fire. They threw them at him, saying that the teenager was burning in hell. But Yeon-woo dodged. He managed to get out and touch the offender with his hand and used his cells to shield himself from the fire like a shield. The gang members were simply shocked by what had happened, so they froze in a stupor. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo had gotten out and was even able to stand up, and his offender was on fire. The teenager realized that he could change the shape of the cells by contacting them. In the Khan River, that person could also do it. Meanwhile, another guy in a white shirt intervened in the fight and told the others that they had to finish off Yeon-woo. Suddenly, the teenager called him by the name of Chun-sik, and for some reason, Yeon-woo knew him. When the boy responded to him, his body suddenly became infected with cells and pierced as if with a needle. Yeon-woo held up his fingers in the shape of a gun, saying that he would have to just destroy them all. The teenager held himself with dignity, his voice sounded very confident and calm, and he added that they were all cockroaches and had to be exterminated. Yeon-woo looked at the frightened, once smug idiots and said that they had no reason to run away. A smile appeared on his face, and the teenager said that from now on, they were all his slaves. Everyone else started running away after these words in terror and screaming. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was just calmly, slowly removing the rest of the tape. After that, he asked the gang where they were all running off to. The teenager reminded them that he said there was no point in running away. Chuk-shin was lying on the floor. He turned to Yeon-woo and screamed in fear. The teenager said with sarcasm how sorry he was. Then he pointed his hand at the boy and gave a command. Yeon-woo raised Chuk-shin's head and asked if he had seen. The teenager wanted to show what kind of people the boy had gotten involved with, because they had just abandoned him. Yeon-woo shouted directly at the scum his partners were, and added that he knew what it was like to be betrayed, and therefore offered to take revenge on them. And then he added that Chuk-seung's body would no longer be the same, but instead, he would take revenge on the traitors. Meanwhile, the other offenders ran away without looking back. But the guy in the black hoodie noticed something strange behind him. His partner was attacked by cells like tentacles. The guy stopped and fell down in fear, but tried to get up immediately and run away. His partner asked him to remove the cages, but he just turned around and wasn't going to do anything. The boy looked at Yeon-woo, who had disfigured his friend's face, and mocked him, apologizing for his actions. He realized that he was facing a real monster and had already regretted getting involved with him 1,000 times. Yeon-woo noticed this look on him and asked him what he was doing. The teenager asked if the boy was planning to escape, and then ordered the cages to attack him. It was the turn of the guy in the gas mask, who was lying on the floor trying to get up. Suddenly, the guy heard someone behind him laughing, saying that the bandit was only pretending to be strong. The offender looked at Yeon-woo and asked him if he felt afraid of him now. Yeon-woo wanted the gangster to understand why this was happening to him, so that he would feel guilty. The teenager asked if he had fun when he infected others. He went on to say that in such situations, the true nature of a person could be exposed, and how ironic that was. Yeon-woo said that now the bandit was standing in front of him and looking at him with completely different eyes. Then he asked if the offender was feeling afraid now. The bandit fell to the floor, covered himself with his hands, and began to apologize and beg for alms. Yeon-woo sat down and with a smile, or was the guy serious now, pointed his hand at him, making a gun. The bandit said he would make sure his friends were safe. Yeon-woo just laughed it off, saying that everything was fine and he would just pay him back. Suddenly, the teenager felt very sick. He felt a sharp pain inside. Yeon-woo leaned over and just fell to the floor, while the others were frightened and covered themselves with their hands. The teenager began to shake. It hadn't happened to him for a long time, and no one understood what was happening to him. The girl got up, approached the guy in the gas mask, and asked what was going on. Yeon-woo turned back and saw that all his monsters were on fire. And then the teenager realized that he felt the pain of that monster. This was bad because Yeon-woo became vulnerable, but the teenager could not understand why he felt his pain. And if he did not understand, he would not be able to solve this problem. At that moment, Yeon-woo lost his focus and something terrible happened. The guy attacked him and kicked him in the face, which knocked Yeon-woo backwards. The teenager fell down and recoiled loudly because he did not expect such a blow. Then the guy came up and hit Yeon-woo again and ordered his partner Park-jun to leave. The boy and the girl shouted excitedly and were happy that they had a chance to escape and be saved. Chun fell behind Yeon-woo and began to run away with the rest of the survivors. The teenager was lying on the floor and could not do anything, holding his arm. He could only raise his head and look at these scum who were running away without punishment. The gang ran out of the room and fled as far as the eye could see. Park Jun asked if anyone had a phone with them. Jeon-woo walked to the edge and looked at where the bandits were running away. But the offenders managed to run away and hide, and were nowhere to be seen. The gang stopped to take a break because they couldn't run that long. It wasn't part of the element of cool. When the gang ran away far enough, they were already on foot, and the girls started shouting at the guys, telling them to deal with Yeon-woo quickly. She was angry and blamed them for everything that happened. Then Chun came back and ordered them to stop screaming, otherwise they would be found quickly, because Yeon-woo would not leave them alone. After that, the gang started quarreling, arguing that Jeon-woo would persecute them all. Then Park Jun intervened, ordering him to stop shouting and listen to him. The guy picked up the phone and said that now they had to destroy Yeonwa. He said he had something and it was nuclear explosives. They began to think about whether to use it on Yeonwa and discussed it so loudly that they didn't notice what they had found for her. Then the guys started discussing among themselves and decided to launch a stream. Suddenly Park Jun stopped and shouted that he had finally remembered his name. At that moment, Jeon-woo called out to them and asked why they were standing there. The teenager stood and said with a smile that he thought they had gotten far. But it turned out that the gang was much dumber than Jeon-woo thought. The offenders began to panic and scream, and the teenager said that he had warned them. Yeon-woo started to come down and said that there were cells in his body that, when touched by humans, turned them into monsters. He asked if the gang really thought he was joking. Yeon-woo went on to ask that the perpetrators were afraid of being infected themselves. Then Park Jun held out his hand and asked me to wait a bit, because he really needed to tell him something. He said they were really terrible people and even people like them shouldn't have lived. But he promised that he would protect Yeonwa's friends. Park Jun promised that he would stop being a scumbag. And then the boy added that he also remembered that one of his classmates also said that he was from Kyonan and from the same school as him. But Jeon-woo called him crazy and added that he would not believe him. Park Jun began to panic and swore that it was true and that he had heard it himself. Suddenly, the boy said that his classmate Yeon-woo was talking about a school trip and that his friends had abandoned him. The teenager realized that he could not have learned this simply from a school pass. Meanwhile, strange things were happening in the city near the church. A woman stood next to her and called on everyone to join them. They were dressed in dark suits and handed out advertisements. Inside was an ordinary church, and people were praying and behaving as usual. Among them were young people. After the service, humanitarian aid in the form of food was distributed to everyone. There were a lot of people because everyone wanted to get free help and food. At the end of the room, there was a crowd of people who were not in uniform. It turned out that they were Jeon-woo's classmates. Next to them was a group of young people who prayed before eating. Then one of the teenagers asked if they should have prayed as well. Isuri said that the food might spoil before they finished praying. Seon-young was outraged and asked them to stop arguing and just start eating. Kang Ji-hoon stood there just looking at the floor and then looked up. Then he just took off, and Kang Min noticed. They went down the stairs because they wanted to be alone. Kang Ming asked how long Kang Ji-hoon had been going on like this and ordered him to come to his senses. But the teenager was silent and just looked out the window. Then Kang Ji-hoon said he wanted to burn it. Kang Min asked what he wanted to burn. The teenager explained that there were a lot of people here and the cells were spreading. And Kang Ji-hoon thought about how to burn them all. Kang Ming said that these were very stupid thoughts. And then the teenager asked him again that it was pointless to wait for death. Kang Ji-hoon remained silent and just looked down at the street through the window. Downstairs, people were calling for people to join the church, and Kang Min told him to stop. He went on to say that he didn't know Han-mi well, but it wasn't Lee Yeon-woo's fault, because it was an accident. He wasn't the kind of person who would just hurt someone. Kang Ji-hoon simply sent a friend in response and said that he would rather take care of everything himself without his help. Kang Min was silent, unable to say anything because Kang Ji-hoon continued to speak. The teenager said that Jeon-woo was no longer the classmate they knew. Meanwhile, the rest of the classmates were waiting for Kang Ji-hoon and Kang Min. Sung-yeon complained that her phone was about to die, but she kept looking at it, and then asked where they were going next. Isuri was sitting by herself, looking at something on her phone, when suddenly, thoughts came to her. She thought about the fact that only Park Seo-young and Park Min were not with them. But then where did that guy go? Park Choa said that she was fine here, and asked if they went back. She didn't know how they would get home. Isuri opened the blogger's channel on her phone and thought that they were probably looking for Janhwa. Suddenly, something caught the girl's attention. She saw a video on a channel called I Finally Saw a Person with Immunity. Meanwhile, on the street, church members were handing out their advertisements and calling on people to join them. There were many people at the entrance, and a pleasant atmosphere of love reigned. Others also distributed water and food free of charge to passers-by and anyone else who wanted it. The woman in glasses and a brown suit suddenly noticed something, and her expression changed dramatically. The soldiers patrolling next to them also noticed this. A church member named Kwon Dee fell behind the soldiers. The soldiers immediately began to approach them, thinking they were infected. But her friend said that the girl had a chronic illness. He explained that Kwon Dee had colon cancer, and even in the hospital she was told that she could not be saved. The girl fell to the ground, folded her arms, and was shaking, but the military seemed to believe them. Kwon Dee prayed without stopping, as her friend advised her. Meanwhile, Kang Min and Kang Ji-hoon were discussing Lee Yeon-woo and what had happened to him. It seemed that Kang Min was beginning to believe that their classmate had changed, and not for the better. Kang Ji-hoon was all in his thoughts and did not listen to what his friend was saying. The boy recalled Ji-han Hyun's words, who said that Kang Ji-hoon looked at himself from the outside because he was putting his friend in danger. Then, the guy just turned around and left without saying anything to Kang Min. The boy was surprised by his friend's strange behavior, but he accepted it and ran after Kang Ji-hoon. Kang Min asked him to listen, saying that they could help Yeon-woo because the cells were dying at high temperatures. He went on to say that the risk was now too great to simply burn them with fire. Kang Min meant that there were several ways. Then Kang Ji-hoon stopped and interrupted his friend, asking if he was serious. He asked if Kang Min really wanted to help Lee Yeon-woo, and this question stunned his friend. Suddenly, the teenager remembered a conversation with Isuri when they got out of the car. The girl asked him if he was a fool. Isuri asked this because she couldn't believe that Kang Min really wanted to help Yeon-woo. Meanwhile, the teenagers were descending the stairs, and Kang Min tried to reassure them that they had to do it. People around them were screaming and running to the ground floor. The guys heard someone say that the police had blocked the exit, and this made them wary. The crowd gathered at the door and shouted at the soldiers, and the military tried to explain that it was an emergency. They wanted to convey that it was all for their own safety, but one of the men was not happy with this. Sung-yeona stood nearby and watched what was happening. Kang Ji-hoon approached her and scared the girl. Seon-young began to resent the fact that they could not leave the church now, but she did not know what had happened. There were more and more people at the exit. Indignation and shouting grew. Then the other teenagers came out, and Park Choa was surprised that Kang Ji-hoon had come. The girl said she thought it would be for a long time. It turned out that it was all because of the dead pigeons in front of the church. Their cells could be dangerous and cause mass infection. Meanwhile, 2 men were carrying a canister inside. 2 women also came in, holding hands because one of them was not feeling well. Sung-yeon passed by these women and shouted indignantly that they could not leave the church. The girl could not see anything in her path, so she hit one of the women with glasses with her shoulder. She fell to the floor, but Sung-yeon responded by accusing the women to watch where they were going. The victim only managed to look up and apologize, and her friend scolded Seung-yeon. The sister helped the woman with glasses and led her into the room because she wanted to pray. Meanwhile, Kang Min tried to prove to Kang Ji-hoon that the heat was causing the cells to die and blocking the chance of spreading. But no one listened to him, so he turned to Park Choa and asked her to listen to him, asking why they thought about their lives, and just left everything as it was. The girl sarcastically said that one could go crazy how interesting everything was. And then she asked what the woman was doing with the canister. Kang Min approached her and offered to help. She was very pleased with the young man's help and ordered him to carry it right up the stairs. But Kang Min suddenly stopped and took his time to relate everything. He was carefully examining the tank he was holding. Then he stopped the woman and asked if he could ask her a question. He wanted to know if it was hot water in the tank. Meanwhile, the events moved to some underground place that looked like an underground parking lot. Inside, there were partitions in the form of grates. The room was surprisingly clean without any virus cells, but very empty. Park Jun cautiously walked out and approached the grate. Then he tapped it with his finger. A guy with long dark hair appeared from behind the wall. Park Jun immediately waved to him and called him his bro. Then the guy waved back when he recognized his friend. They opened the grate for the newly arrived company to enter. The boy waved to the girl because he was surprised that she had come, but his friend did not greet him very warmly. She only said that another one had come with him. The guy asked who it was, and Jong-woo stood in front of him and didn't say a word.